The following program is presented by the Metropolitan Library Service Agency.
Hello, welcome to All About Kids, a program focusing on the interests of children and young people and some of the issues affecting them. A big issue in most families is appropriate discipline for the children. Our guest today, Dr. William Sears, is the author of the Discipline book. He'll be discussing positive parenting techniques with Fran Hesch, Minnesota chapter of the National Parenting Association.
I'm here with Dr. William Sears, author of the Discipline book, Everything You Need to Know to Have a Better Behaved Child from Birth to Age 10. I understand you co-wrote this with your wife, Martha Sears.
Yes.
I was reading your bio, and it said that you were an assistant professor in pediatrics at a university in Southern California, and you have been the chief of pediatrics of a clinic, and you've been who's who in 1987 in California. And frankly, when I first read it, as being a parent on the front lines, I've learned to distrust people with a lot of credentials. Yes. However, when I read this book, I realized that you really do know of what you speak. I read in the introduction and also the information on your wife that you parent 8 children.
Yes.
How has that changed and evolved over the years in forming this book?
Well, really, that's I would claim as my best credential, is having parented 8 children. In fact, this book, Fran, was written on the job. What Martha and I have done for the past 28 years, every time one of our discipline techniques worked for one of our children, we'd write it down. And what didn't work, we didn't write it down. And over the years, we accumulated a large file of what worked and what didn't. What worked for us and what I've accumulated in my pediatric practice over 25 years, when a mother or father would come in and share with me a story or what worked for them, I'd write it down. And I looked at kids. I said, these are kids I like. Now, what did these parents do that kids I don't like do? And I wrote that down. So all of what's in the book was really just accumulation of what we have learned as to what works for most parents most of the time.
What you have found, from what I read, is that the best discipline comes out of what you call attachment parenting,
yes.
whereby parents really get to know who their children are, their temperament, what pushes their buttons, kind of inside and out. Can you explain that a little bit?
Yes, the term attachment parenting, Fran, means getting connected to your child. That's the key to discipline. You have to first get connected to your child before you can even begin to discipline your child. That's part of discipline. The term attachment parenting is a high-touch style of parenting. It starts with the moment of birth. It means giving a sensitive, nurturant response to your baby's cry instead of the old let them cry it out. It means nursing your baby, breastfeeding your baby as long as you can. It means holding your baby a lot, wearing your baby in a baby sling, even sleeping with your baby if that's what works for you. The more hours per day that parents and children can be in physical touch with one another when that baby is young, then the easier that baby is going to discipline. This is what I mean by attachment parenting.
How do you address the people who say, let the baby cry, I'm going to be in charge, the child has to know immediately from day one who the parent is, and basically that what the people are saying is that the child's needs are not as important as the needs of the parents. How do you address that statement?
Well, actually, a parent needs to be in charge, and a child needs to feel that a parent's in charge. If a child does not feel that mom and dad are in charge, that child is out of control. That child will run wild. That child will be anxious. Children who are well disciplined know that someone is in charge. Someone has set house rules. Children function well if there are limits. But the issue of control And many parents are hung up on that issue of control, that I'm not a good discipline unless I am in control of my child. Well, quite honestly, Fran, people cannot control people. You control situations, not children. You control the home environment. You make it safe for the child. You can schedule certain things. You can structure the child's environment. You can set house rules and be sure the child obeys them. But as far as parents feeling they're controlling their child, they can't, and that stems from letting your child cry it out. This was probably the worst advice anyone can ever give a new mother, especially, to say, now, Fran, let your baby cry it out. That goes against all the things we know, even scientifically, and this has been done. If you wire a mother up in a laboratory and find out what goes on physiologically in her body when her baby cries. When her baby cries, her hormones change. The blood flow to her breasts goes up. Her whole physiology changes, that a mother is biologically programmed to respond and give a nurturant response to her baby's cries, not to let her baby cry it out. The parents who are taught to let babies cry it out, this creates insensitivity in the parent, that the parent learns to follow someone else's advice and not themselves. And that's what gets parents in trouble.
How do parents set limits then?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, sometimes when a child is up all during the night
Mm-hmm.
and the parent is picking them up constantly,
Sure.
at some point the parent has to decide that the good night's sleep is a value. And just in general, I remember reading in your book the different characteristics that you're trying to raise in your children. It kind of sets the vision for all your actions. Can you talk
That's
about
right.
the characteristics of the kind of child that you and your wife decided you were raising? I know it seemed kind of universal.
Sure.
I related to what you said.
Well, actually, we did that one time. We sat down and said, okay, who are the persons we want to turn out? In fact, my wife Martha would oftentimes get static. What, Martha? You have 8 children. Aren't you worried about overpopulating the world? And Martha will look at them and say, the world needs my kids. And that's because we want to turn out, first of all, kids who care. Sensitivity. That's the key, and that begins in the first few months of life. When that baby is responded to and carried and loved and held and touched and whose cries are answered, that baby learns trust. That baby learns sensitivity. The same people who picked him up or her up and cared for her needs when she was young, that baby, that child, that adult person is going to carry that sensitivity over to when she's adult. So we want to turn out kids who care, sensitive kids. Children who trust, children who when another child hurts, they're going to say, may I help you? Children who are polite, children who have those inner controls, who make the right choices. I've often, in many instances in our children, when I see them making the wrong choice, I sit down with them and I'll say, Matthew, think through what you're about to do. Because I know my role as house disciplinarian is to teach my children, to equip them with the tools to make the right choice.
That's probably the one thing I keyed into the most, and frankly, it's kind of an argument within my own household because of the different way my husband and I were raised, imposing will over trying to instill self-control mechanisms. And it's easier when they're younger, I think. As they get into the 2s and older, you do get that clash of wills. Can you talk about that a little bit? I mean, that raises the whole issue of spanking and those kinds
and
of
control
things.
of wills, and what is hard for first-time parents is to project themselves into the mind of their child. They feel, gosh, I'm not going to let that child manipulate me. I am going to be in control. Well, that doesn't usually work. For example, our 5th child, Matthew, was a very focused child. When he got into a play situation or a toy, he was riveted to that. And you couldn't pry him away. This is just the way he came wired. So when we'd say, now Matthew, it's time to go, he wouldn't obey. It's not because he was being defiant, he was just focused. So instead of yanking him up and carrying a screaming child out, a screaming 2-year-old out of the room, we realized this is what Matthew was. He was a focused child. So before, what I'd do, I'd go in and I'd say, now Matthew, say bye-bye to the truck, bye-bye to the boys, bye-bye to the girls, bye-bye to the toys. I gave him a chance to unfocus, a chance to cut loose of his agenda and click into my agenda. Now this wasn't handling over control. This wasn't being manipulated. This was just using common sense in realizing that this child was a focused child, and I could get him into my agenda. I could encourage him to become obedient and to listen to what I had to say, but I had to go through what his basic temperament was first.
Right. Do you think there's any time when spanking is appropriate?
Well, let me give a one-word answer and say no, and then qualify that a bit. I think it's probably wrong for anyone to say to any parent, you shouldn't do anything, because some parents sincerely believe, some loving, caring, wonderful parents believe that an occasional spanking does fit their whole discipline package. Now, the reason I'm personally against spanking is, first of all, it just plain doesn't work. And I've collected over 25 years in pediatric practice sort of what works and what doesn't, and overwhelmingly I've seen spanking in the long run just doesn't work. Also, it creates a distance between the spanker and the spankee, that children learn to fear the parents. They don't learn to act out of inner controls. They learn to act because of fear. They have external controls, and so when the spanker is out of the room, the child runs wild. But even more importantly, I think spanking models for the child that it's okay for big people to hit little people. And I think it does plant the seeds for violence. In fact, there are lots of studies showing that spank-controlled children are more likely to be aggressive, angry, violent adults. There's the old classic story where a mother, a loving, caring mother, in fact, I had this in my practice too, a loving, caring mother who felt, I've got to spank to be a good disciplinarian. So she spanked her 3-year-old a lot. So when a new baby came in the house, the mother saw one day the 3-year-old was spanking the baby. And she says, Joni, what are you doing? You don't spank a baby. And the 3-year-old says, I'm just playing mommy. Well, needless to say, that mother never spanked another child. But that, children pick up that it's okay in a conflict situation to handle it by violence. And so this is one of the reasons, Fran, I'm becoming increasingly against spanking.
Do you find that there's a kind of a gray area that people refuse to talk about where, and I'm kind of fessing up here, I always said I would never strike a child. However, when I was a young mother and in a situation, in my children's memory, there are maybe 2 or 3 occasions where I did strike them, and it stood out because it's not what mom. And I apologized. I said, it's never okay. However, I'm human, and that was a mistake. And I guess I'm asking you right now, how do you feel about that in a child's eyes, where you admit
where you blow it? I have done the same thing.
Oh, good.
In fact, when I've looked back at the times in our early years of parenting, before we knew better, that when I occasionally spanked our children, fortunately they didn't need to be spanked very often, but every time I did spank our child, later I realized, I could have handled that better. I did not, something inside of me said that was not right. And so what we've learned to do is create in our family a no spanking mindset. We are programmed not to spank. Now, however, we're also programmed that we will take charge of our children, that we will be strong, firm disciplinarians, which means that we've got to come up with creative alternatives so we don't click right into spanking. Before we get the urge to spank, having programmed ourselves against it, a situation arises which we don't spank, then we've got to click into another alternative. And now, regarding your question about mistakes, parents all blow it. There's no such thing as a perfect parent, and we don't have 2 right here either. But when we use, when we're blowing it, to turn that around to our advantage. If I make a mistake and I discipline one of our children inappropriately, I'll sit down and I'll talk about it with my child. Or say I've had a bad day and I blow off steam and get angry. Then I sit down and I talk about my mistake. A child learns this is real life, that people make mistakes, even their parents. But the key issue is that we take responsibility for correcting them. That's the message that I want to leave with my child when I make a mistake. That, okay, I made a mistake, I blew it, but it's my responsibility to correct that mistake. So many children I see, Fran, in the teenagers now, so many are growing up as kids who don't care. There's no remorse. There's no, I blew it, now I've got to take responsibility for my actions. And that's one of the hallmarks of discipline that we have throughout our book is you've got to create in the child the attitude that I have got to be responsible for my behavior, that I have got to project into another person, that how is my behavior going to affect the other person?
I think parents out there are probably sighing a relief that it's okay to make mistakes. I know
Sure it is.
people like to take a black and white stance on things. You either spank
We're
or you
human.
don't. You have, that you're never going to
Right.
make a mistake. But the more and more we talk about the fact that it's difficult work, and
Absolutely.
you need all
Toughest job
the
you'll ever do.
education. That's why reading the
Yeah.
books and having the books available is so very important. It sounds like you and your wife really have a system, and obviously, you've written the book together. A lot of us are not that lucky that we have been able to arrive at a systematic plan for our parenting and our discipline. How do you talk a little bit about reconciling those differences between
Sure.
husbands and wives and their styles?
And actually, you use those differences to your advantage. That men and women, males and females, husbands and wives, don't always agree. And in fact, I'm not so sure that it's not healthier if you don't always agree, because a child gets both views. For example, one day our 3-year-old was going out to jump on the monkey bars. And then I added an encouraging, climb higher. Martha added a protecting, be careful. So that the child got two messages. It's okay to climb higher, but be careful. See, so this is a bit of balance that husbands and wives, moms and dads, will often give a child a message based upon their own beliefs. And it's okay. It's not a conflicting message. That oftentimes, if it's done in a right way, that a mom and dad will balance each other.
There's a passage in your book about discipline being therapeutic for the parent.
Yes.
I found that extremely fascinating because as you are challenged with setting limits and trying to encourage your child to have self-control, you're also learning about your own hot buttons and the way you were raised. Can you talk a little bit about that therapeutic nature?
Well, discipline really is a personal discovery in how you were parented. And I had one mother I was counseling who had a very difficult childhood, and she said, many times when I'm disciplining my child, I hear my own mother's voice come out of my mouth. And so discipline is therapeutic. It almost in a way gives you a second chance, that it in some way gives you a chance to give your child the start you never got. And we all have buttons. We all carry baggage from our past. We may have been raised in an abusive home where spanking and violence and heavy-handedness and yelling were the mode of discipline. And maybe and I say to parents, don't be too hard on your mom and dad, because your mom and dad probably did the best they could given the prevailing baby care advice at the time. It wasn't that they were wrong. They were doing what they thought was right. So don't be too judgmental on mom and dad. But some of us do carry baggage from our past, as you mentioned, buttons that push our buttons. Now, if you realize you have that, for example, suppose you were raised with someone was raised in an abusive home. That means that you're at risk for spanking in an abusive way. So to realize those buttons are there. If you're a person easily provoked to anger, then use time out for yourself. That if a child pushes your button, as you know they do. You've had a rough day at work, you're tired, or it's just not a good day for you. and a child pushes your button, take time out. Before you do something you're going to be sorry for, say, okay, he's pushing my button. I need, in fact, Martha many times has done that with our children. She'll look over and she'll say, you're disturbing my peace. You're disturbing Mommy's peace. I need some peace and quiet. Or she'll go in the bathroom and have time out, or go in the bedroom and have time out. I need some time out.
That is so true. I have done that where it surprised when my daughter was 5. She's 7 now. It surprised the heck out of her when I said, I need a timeout.
Yes. Right.
Speaking of timeouts, do you find that valuable to, for the instance of a temper tantrum, or do you find that valuable to segregate the child or use timeouts?
I do, Fran, because, see, timeout is not, call it what you wish, punishment or not, but timeout is simply a break in the action where the child is out of control. And you're coming in and you're taking charge. And you're saying, Johnny, okay, you're out of control. I'm not going to put up with that. This is the behavior I expect. Now I want you to go sit there on the piano bench. We use a piano bench. I hope my children will grow up not hating piano benches, but you're benched. Okay? You sit there until you can come back and give me your nice voice. So it gives the child a time out of the action to sit there and reflect, okay, how did I blow it? We also call it rewind, that sometimes when I would ask one of my children, say, okay, Matthew, help Dad set the table. Oh, Dad, I don't want to. They grumble. I'll say, oh, wait a minute, rewind, let's play it again. So I'll come back, I'll make a grand entrance to the kitchen, and I'll say, Matthew, help me set the table. And he laughs by that time because, rewind. See, I've called his attention to, okay, Matthew, where did we blow it there? I'm giving him sort of a second chance to come to his own conclusion that I'm not going to grumble this time. And that's much better than just spanking him because he grumbled, because now he's coming to his own conclusion. This is the behavior that Dad expects of me. He expects a yes, Dad, not a grumble.
This is also tied together. You raised the issue of responsibility in children. I just heard someone speaking this morning who was saying that we're finding the discipline problems and some of the violence because children are being raised to be entertained, to be used as showpieces for their parents, and they're not needed. They're not integral parts of the chores anymore. Yeah. Is that part of your discipline plan, to have the children having chores and responsibilities?
Absolutely. A child needs to learn responsibility at a young age, which we've learned that one of the benefits of a family, in fact a necessity, is that to give the older children responsibility for looking after the younger kids. Wonderful way for sibling rivalry. When a new baby comes in the house and the 3-year-old is moping around because of her needs aren't being met, Molly, Mom's going to give you a job as Mommy's assistant, and I'll pay you 50 cents. Wow, Mommy's assistant. Sounds important, builds up the child's self-esteem. I even get paid for it. So children need the sense of responsibility to think through what they're about to do. It was called empathy. That many of our today's problems, our jails, our violence, our crime, could be traced down to one little word, insensitivity. That the inability for one person to project into another person and say, now how are my actions, how is my behavior going to affect the feelings and the rights of another person? And you can teach a child that at 2, that how their actions affect Mommy and Daddy. I'm not happy with what you did. That hurt me, or that makes me sad. The other day, our 17-year-old, I was telling a story at the family dinner table about an unfortunate thing that happened in my practice, and our 17-year-old said, how sad. See, now that told me right away that she cared. We want to raise kids who care.
So really, the whole sibling relationship is kind of a laboratory for the rest of society.
Absolutely.
I have 2 daughters that are
yes.
wonderful, wonderful girls,
Yeah.
but there are times when I'm convinced that there is absolutely no way they will ever care about one another. And I replay that from my youth. My sister and I were like that, but we love each other now, but I remember those years of just For some reason, it wasn't for attention. I don't know what it was. It was just that antagonistic relationship.
Yeah.
How do you minimize that or work with that?
So one thing that's helped for us is when one sibling hurts, we call it the sib as minister approach. When one child hurts, we take the rest of the kids and we get around, we say, hey, let's all kind of put our hands on Billy's leg here that really hurts and see if we just can't, rub it a little bit and all make it better. Getting kids to touch their other kids. Getting kids to in a way show that they care. That if you hurt, I care about you hurting. Getting kids connected. Getting behind the eyes of the child and seeing things from their viewpoint.
Everything you've talked about today relates to getting to know your children, having the siblings know each other. Really, this is a living thing, this family thing.
Yes.
How can, in America's society today, with the lack of time and everybody being rushed and the overburdened child that's being signed up for dance and baseball and everything, how do you address that? What do you say to parents about that?
The key is, in fact, Fran, one of our book really is called the Discipline Book, but it's really a prescription for family living, basically. And one of the keys is you get connected to your kids early on. Those first 2 years, you get connected, and you maintain that connection all along, because see, the family is boot camp for life. It is training camp for life. It is the first society in which a child is exposed. So if the child, you set the norms. See, children aren't born knowing the norms. So you set what is normal expected behavior in your mini society. If you yell and spank and hit and are distant, then that child learns this is the norms of society. This is how I'm supposed to behave. This is how people behave. So he carries that aggressive behavior out in society. But if you're a high-touch family who makes eye contact, who put hands on shoulder, hugs and kisses family, an I care family, then to the child, this is the norm. That is the norm that the child learns. Oh, this is what's expected. In fact, I had a mother come into the office a while ago and said, I'm really upset with what's happening in society. The violence on the street, the schools are unsafe, the government has no handle on this. I feel hopeless. And I said to her, Mary, you can change the world, one child at a time. Discipline your child. That's how you'll make a difference in society. Turn out into the society a connected kid, and then sit back and be proud of the effect you've made.
Dr. Sears, that's amazing, because I had my thumb in the place in your book where you had quoted that, and I was going to bring that up because that really hit home with me and made me realize that you are an expert in this field, and it's not just credentials. I've really enjoyed interviewing you.
Thank you.
And if you can leave one thing, besides what you just said about disciplining your children and creating that mini society within your home that everybody wants to see, what would be the last thing you would say to families?
Well, I would say that many families in having young children think, gosh, will this ever pass? Will this high-touch stage of holding and getting up at night and nursing and responding to will it ever pass? It's going to be exhausting. The time at your breast, the time in your bed, the time in your arms is a very short time in the life of a child. But the memories of love and availability last a lifetime.
Thank you, Dr. Sears. It's been wonderful.
Thank you, Fran. Good.
Thank you, Dr. William Sears and Fran Hesch, for so many positive parenting suggestions. Thanks to all of you for joining us on All About Kids. Please tune in again.
This has been a presentation of Hennepin County Library. in conjunction with the Twin Cities Metropolitan Library Service Agency.